Hello, welcome everyone to your grandmother's living room. This is DocuSpace Season 1, Episode 2. I am Ravi, I'm your host. I'm from Pakistan.
And I'm Joseph. I'm also your host. I am from Ghana.
I'm Imeng. I'm your guest. I'm from China.
I am Sarah, your guest, and I'm from Ohio.
All right, awesome. Yeah, so today's episode we'll be talking about. Today's episode is called "It's a Design Exercise," and we'll be talking about design in terms of what people colloquially understand it to be, and then how we are trying to expand the definition to allow people to realize that design is something that's always happening intrinsically in all decisions of your life. Of course, that can take on very different meanings and roles, and there's levels to that. And so we're going to discuss about how we as designers interface with design as people know it, and then how we think people can actually start to engage consciously in how they design little aspects of your life. So this can be in terms of your living room or your meal plan, and your accessories, how you dress yourself. I think those are the more obvious ones, but we also think that the trajectory of your life can be a design, and the way that you see yourself in your environment and how you make decisions to enact your desires and your goals. So without further ado, I guess we'll start with, I think for me, design has been something that initially had a very concrete definition to it, where I thought of design as something that happened in the art realm, and then later on in architecture, but I never thought of it as anything more than that. And I think in in high school, actually, was probably the first time I had to do a very serious design exercise, which was when I decided to not do engineering and do architecture, actually, and trying to figure out how that was going to work and what that was going to mean for my life. So I think some of the, as I was kind of alluding to, some of the biggest design decisions we make are in our lives. So I'm curious as to if you guys have any similarities in terms of decisions in your life that you think you had to really design through.
I mean, I can go unless anyone else wants to. But deciding on, I still don't know what I'm doing in life or what I want to do in life. It's all so confusing. But there's a couple of core memories or key moments that make me realize that these are the things I want to do, and then I can narrow down and sort of move forward from there. And of course, there's circumstances like familial and others. There's always going to be external pressure. So I come from an art background, and I used to love sciences and math, and then I came to Cornell and everything was just like, oh my God, what's going on? And it was really hard the first 2 years, I think. And then in third year, I attended this film class, and it just made me so happy. It's just a history of film class, and I went in there, and it just changed my life in a way that I can't describe. And that just made me want to get a film minor. So with my architecture major, then I started to get a film minor. And then I believe also during COVID, we had this sculpture studio. That was a requirement that we had to do. And, I was staying up late for that at 4 a.m. at night. And I just loved doing that. And I realized that to me personally, it matters more when design is more sort of human centric, if that makes sense. Like, if I look at films, the sets, they're designed in a way that cater to how a person is going to move in a field or around the camera. Same with sculpture. It's just so hands-on and it's so interesting, and that just helps me make certain decisions about where my trajectory is going to go. Like right now I'm doing traditional architecture work, but possibly in the future it's also something I want to expand on. Like maybe I'll go to film school and study film, or something along those lines. Yeah.
Yeah, I completely resonate with that. Like in a sense, design is non-linear, and a lot of times I feel it's the same. It's true in life as in a design process, whereby it's not like if you do A, you would do B. And then if you do B, you would come up with C. It's more like after you do A, you're like, C sounds great, let's go C. And then you go back, you're like, you want to throw B in, otherwise you won't have a bathroom in your house. I feel like that's so true for life as well. In a sense, realizing that you are designing your life, but at the same time, cooking all the elements of whether that's architecture design or life decisions
Mhm.
together, not like cooking, where you have to add oil at a certain time, but it's more so um, a collage of things back and forth. I was just talking to Joseph yesterday because he's had to come to grad school after I'm graduating almost. So that's a good reminder that time or designing your life can be very non-linear and very intuitive, if I might say, sometimes process. So yeah.
Yeah, and that's a great point. It's the non-linearity of it. I think usually too, especially in architecture, people usually assume that we decide we're gonna build a house and then we sit down and we draw it. And it's like, oh, why is that so hard? just draw the house or draw the chair. And it's very often that sometimes you'll even get to the very end of what you thought you wanted and see it, and then have to restart all over again. Um, and that's something that I really come to appreciate working in architecture actually is a lot of times it's a little heartbreaking because you're like, I just put a lot of effort into doing this, but then you realize that to really get to the goal and the desire, and I think really that's what design's about, right? There's some kind of desire or goal, and
Mhm.
maybe that's not clear from the beginning, but that's also something that can develop, right? Where sometimes the goal moves or what you thought you wanted isn't what you thought you wanted. And also we also do that with clients too, where they come to us and they're like, oh, I want a house that looks exactly this way. And first you have to like roll back what the essence of why they want that is, and then figure out how to actually translate that into something that's also works and looks good and
Mhm.
is safe. Um, so I think in terms of our lives too, right? Like you're always having to question yourself and thinking, this is what I wanted, but now that you're there and you're in it, then you have to retool and use where you are to get to where you want to be. And I think we all are, especially in this very stage of our lives, we're all kind of doing a little bit of that dance.
Yeah. I mean, we'll get to Sarah, but I just wanted to add on what you're saying. Like, when I realized that, oh, I'm not as happy as I thought doing architecture or well, architecture in school, because architecture's work is very different. I think I kind of like it. But while I was doing that and I realized that I was much happier doing other things, I just went through this weird breakup phase. I know I was crying with Joseph on BB Lake and a catfish attacked us. That's also a core memory. But, I just realized that, wherever I go, architecture is something that is going to come with me. Or like if I'm doing something else, there's always going to be elements that lead into it. And if I do end up doing something else, it doesn't mean I can't come back to doing architecture, which is just really all design is about. You're like A, B, C. I love the way you said it, Imang. It's just everything. And how Joseph said that you can always come back to things, or you may have to scrap something altogether and start anew. Um, that's what it's about. Yeah.
And I think that's the part of the fun of design and architecture. We're allowed to bounce around, revisit, and rework. It's even encouraging, and you can always come back to it, and it's never fully a finished product, which I think is the joy of design. For instance, growing up, I had no idea that I wanted to do architecture. I was very haphazard about it. I just knew that I wanted to have a creative outlet, freedom, and channeling that childhood whimsy into design, which ultimately led to architecture, met me on all those levels. And it's truly where I feel that I fit in. And it also allows you to expand and contract and really works with you. You can either lean deeper into it or focus on research. And there's so many angles you can take with it. And it grows with you, which is so important, right? Because as we get older, our interests change. What we like when we're younger is completely different. So to your point, now we are students and young professionals, and it's really hard to know exactly where we're going to fit into the world. And I just think that's one of the many incredible things about architecture and design. Because if it was super rigid, it would be a great disservice to designers today.
Yeah,
Yeah,
as we talk
Iman?
about this creative processes, like you can always jump from one to A to B, I guess. I I want to throw everyone a question. Like, have you ever felt at one point your design is complete?
No.
I was I was thinking that's the the thing that I felt the strongest only after coming or studying, having a design education is that I feel like a creative process is never complete. It's only about like at this time you have to stop. Um, so applying that to life, I think that's super interesting in a sense. You feel like after this phase, you always have a next phase that you have to design or come back to it in a sense. The never endingness of fun or not fun
Of problems, the never endingness of
problems.
problems.
It's not like doing like a
It's
massive
life.
problem
That's life.
where you're like, yeah, I got 1 + 1 = 2, I'm done. No, it's like, okay, can you like change the place of this plus sign so it looks more
Yeah.
balanced?
Let's add an under root in there.
Let's
We'll do an
like
integral,
clean
you
up.
know?
Exactly.
Right. That's such a funny thing about it, right? Like, I think the fact that there's a question of finalities, you know, especially in design, we have phases, and in work, it's even more explicit, right? We have like design development, schematic design, then contract documents, and there's so many other steps that can be between or after, or you know, later down the line of that. Um, and you know, in a building, at some point, you're right. Like we do design, but at some point, you have to build the building,
Yeah.
so you can't design forever. You can't like spend. I mean, it takes a while sometimes. You know, there's some things that are designed for like decades before they actually ever materialize. But you know, and that happens in our lives too, right? There's like some things that you work towards for a very long time. I mean, I feel like people in the medical field would probably know how that works. But that's I think that's the thing that we kind of wanted to share with the audience today is like there are things that don't feel like they are designed, and we think that everybody's doing it, but we kind of wanted people to become a bit more conscious of that, right? That everybody's kind of in this game where you're making these decisions, and there is an outcome and there's a goal, and maybe you don't realize it at the time, or and all these decisions affect you, right? So even if it's not something as grandiose, or even I guess maybe people don't like to think about life that way, but even if it's not your life, right, it can be things like the way that you set up your commute, for example, right? Like if some people are very particular about that, and I think that is very designed for some people, right? For example, I have some friends that will wake up at 6 and then they have to have breakfast and then go for a little run, and then afterwards they need to come back and then take a shower and then brush their teeth and then get breakfast and then do all this, right? And I could never wake up at 6. Like that's just not something that I could ever implement into my own life. But I think even something like that is so intentional and so integral to a person's function. And in that essence, everybody, whether they've consciously done it or not, has designed like how they live their life, right? Like how you wake up is part of that. And then even like the groceries you buy, right? Like you're sort of designing your palate, you're designing your diet, right? If you buy X, Y, and Z groceries, then this is probably the menu of things you're going to have available to you, unless of course you're like me and every now and then you order food. And even then, that's still like something that you're actively doing, right? And of course, I'm not trying to catastrophize it, making it like every little thing in your life you have to be like, okay, I'm doing this for this or this or that. I'm just trying to make the point that we are always making these decisions, big or small, but they do add up to a bigger picture of how we operate and how we exist and how we relate to one another. And some people have bonded on the fact that they wake up so early, right? That's even part of how like we start to see ourselves and to express ourselves. And in that sense, we think it is important to be aware of these decisions that you're making and be a more conscious designer of your life, right? Start to take agency and things that maybe not all aspects of your life, but there are ways in which you can start to identify things that you think can lead to other things in your life, right? And that's why I kind of brought up this idea of desire and goal, because I think everybody has some of that, whether it's a big idea of like I want to change the world or something, or if it's very small that I just want to be a bit more of an active member in my community in a small way.
Going off of that, I feel like in terms of profession also, design isn't limited to architects, artists, filmmakers, etc. Creative things, I feel. Like I was telling Joseph that I saw this video recently of a surgeon using the surgery tools to fold or make a paper crane. And it was just the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen, like just using very intricate tools to create something that I never understand origami, but it was so complicated and so beautiful. And I was like, I can't see how this is not art. It just, it is. The work they do is. Or like we're putting together at home, we're putting our friends' artwork on the wall, and this one person came over and she does coding. She's like, oh, I have nothing to contribute to your wall. And I was like, just take a screenshot of one of your codes and I will put it up. Because again, you're designing every step of the way if you do coding or whatever the technical term for that is. And I think it's important to sort of recognize that you do design. Some people do design in their professions, and it's just not limited to creatives. I also feel that we, as people who have been trained in design or have studied design, we're sort of more aware of when we're designing as compared to others. And I think a lot of this discussion is about just kind of making that more accessible, or yeah, what Joseph said.
Yeah, and I guess I'll jump off to that because I think uh, what Rebbe was saying, right, with the coding, and when we spoke about that earlier, I was like, even the way that like the coding script looks is kind of like has a design sort of ability to it, right? Like I just always think of like those movies where the character is hacking some sort of system, and then you have like all the code text happening behind them, and every coder that I know says like that's not how it actually happens, but like that's like a powerful communicator of like something complicated is happening right now with this character. And I think even though maybe there's a very pure functionality to it, right? You're putting functions and actions and whatever code script you're writing, like as a collective, it starts to look almost artistic in a way. And I think sometimes the design element or the design functionality of something and the the outcome and how people sort of perceive it can be very different. And like what Robbie's saying, like we kind of look at that and I'm like, oh, that's actually kind of interesting. Like you might think to put that on your wall if you find that speaks to you.
Just on a little bit on, I guess, designing everyday details. I think, well, as architectural designers, we sometimes feel very entitled to like, oh, I'm gonna design everything around my life. Interior design, like I'm so proud of my um, place that despite the only thing I really add is the painting. Um, but then like, yeah, sometimes you feel like, you have the power to add a little bit of value or happiness to your life. I think that's one major thing that sort of thinking as a designer changed my little bit of my everyday life in a sense. But then also there's this. I was also thinking about this quote when you guys share with me the topic. It's quoting one of the Loeb Fellows at Harvard, and then his name is Dario Calmes, and then he was once throwing out this question whereby if the world is designed, this is designed, and this is designed, and who designs it? I think that's sort of touching upon the agencies behind all design. In a sense,
Yeah.
you realizing that everything around you is designed by somebody that out there, give you that sort of agency to think, okay, if I want my life or my neighborhood or my community to look like this, then I need to figure out who designs it, or can I be a designer? So I think that's something, thinking as a designer, even though you're not a designer, your professional world might not be working as architecture design, or you're working as a developer in coding, whatever, but like recognizing everything is designed somehow by someone, give you the agency or power to figure out what the next step would be or how to implement that change.
I mean, even in communities, organizations exist. And if you want to make a change, odds are you don't have to start from scratch, which is amazing. And I think as designers, we get so excited about the design part that we forget about the on the ground movement part, and what it means to really get involved. And it's okay for other people to lead sometimes, and that might even be better. Everyone has different strengths, different skills. And that's the same thing is true for issues that we find really important and near and dear to us. To find leaders in our community and work alongside them, empower those other leaders. And everything we come in contact with has the capacity to have an impact, whether it's in the built environment, a park, all the way down to us as individuals. And I think it's such a cool thought that everyone has that intrinsic power to design their day.
Off of what Imang said, it's so funny that I think what you're saying, especially with agency, is so important because the whole reason why people really need to be aware of design is that it really affects your life in so many ways, right? Like the world is designed, like you were saying, and I think that's such a really beautiful quote for that. And once you start to become aware of all these things that are designed that influence you, you can also start to become aware of how they influence you, right? I think, for example, like even like the iPhone, like its design and its UI has become something that's like so iconic and ubiquitous that people and other phone companies have started to copy it. And I think within I guess our design world, and when I speak to other designers, they're like always fawning about like how this is done and how it's so useful that you can do this, and even the sounds of it and the feel of it and all those things, right? And it has become such a um, an icon, right? That it is a cultural influence on us, and people do have a status symbolism to it too, right? And that's like, I think that in a weird way, that's like, I guess the most explicit example, right? Like people really do value the idea of having an iPhone, and they communicate that to each other. And so I think in those ways, like we can also be aware of like how it's influenced our abilities to function, and also the way that we view ourselves, right? What do we get taught? What are other meanings and other symbolisms we attach to like design elements of our life, right? I guess for me, I do not have an iPhone, PSA, but I'm rebelling in that way. But I think for me, when I think of, for example, like like how I guess I'll go back a little bit. So I kind of learned how to ride a bike properly I guess a year ago now, right? And for me, like I think when I was first learning to ride the bike again, because I kind of rode a bike like maybe 1 or 2 times as a kid, and then realizing like I had been riding this bike wrong the whole time because I had the seat too low, and I didn't realize that that was something that I could be able to adjust. Right. So, and I was like, oh, this is really cool because every time I stop, I could literally just put my foot out and still be sitting on the bike. And then later on, my boss was like, why is your bike seat so low? Because he was trying to ride it. And then I realized, like, in essence, like I had not realized that all these elements of the bike, right? Like the way that it brakes and the way that you can adjust it. And even like it has these gears, and the ratio of the gears that you makes it move faster, or makes the work out of it a little bit harder. And like over time of like riding this bike over and over again and like learning how it works, it's also made me more comfortable and more, I guess, reckless in a way, because I'm kind of feeling more like, okay, I know how this vehicle works. I'm willing to take more risks. Like I'm willing to go faster on a curve, right? Because I know how this thing operates, and I know the inner mechanisms of it. So if I adjust my body weight in this way, then I, know that I'll make this curve, right? So in essence, like in learning how these things that we interface with are designed, we can actually make the most of them too, right? So we can actually extract more of its functionality and extract more of its purpose. And it can also, better our lives, right? I'm not sure if being, comfortable on a bike is super life-changing for me, but I don't know that yet. Maybe there'll be a time where that'll really matter for me. But as of now, that's, how I get to work. So, yeah.
Well, I have a really dumb example of that, and the agency Good Design has. I have the Pixel Pro, Google Pixel, and I just bought it because of its design, because I really like it, much like an iPhone. And I also know that Joseph got it. But when Joseph was getting it, he was doing so much research, and he was telling me all these things a Pixel phone can do that I didn't know because I just got it because of its name. And I was like, oh, great camera. I know it has a great camera, so I'm just gonna get it because of that.
Fancy name.
Yeah, I know. Maybe they should sponsor us or something, but
Nice guy.
but that's so interesting because now he probably knows how to use a Pixel phone more than I do, or like he does recordings on it and stuff, and knows how to edit them on the phone, and that's just like a really stupid example of how like knowing the design just helps you use it more, and that's so interesting.
There's another agency example I'll bring. It's slightly more detached. I apologize, but
No, no.
it's so another famous guy came here to give a lecture. His name is Manuel Salgado. He's a Portuguese planner and architect. And then so when he gave example, when he transitioned from being an architect to a planner, and then I think this we might encounter in later phase in life, be like people asking, do you miss design? You know, like when we stopped doing architectural design, in the sense like we're so like playful with form and light and shadow and space, you know. But then he's like, you know, institution designs too. You know, being a planner essentially is doing design at an institutional level, at a bigger scale, with more responsibility, because your design is not just someone else's private house, but a city, in a sense. So, just another quote I feel like the agency part can fit right in.
I agree. I keep
Now let's
going
bring
back.
back to normal life, daily life.
No, seriously, I keep thinking back to my dilemma. Like I was going through a breakup phase with architecture third year, but then I realized, no, I am going to be doing design no matter what field I go into. It is going to be design related. And even accounting, I would like to think would be design related, but I don't exactly know what they do.
Like maybe that's a red herring for you need an accountant.
Yeah. I also think it's pretty cool. I don't know who told this to me. I don't want to be quoting anybody. But it's just that every firm is not a design firm, but every firm may need a designer. I thought that was a really cool thing I heard from I don't know where again. And that just highlights just the importance of design in that way, because even if you're like in a very corporate boring firm, you're still going to need a designer. So let's just say do your logo, you're going to need a designer, or like publicity team who's literally going to design how you are going to approach the world or how you look towards the world. And it's just fascinating how much kind of agency we as designers do have. And sometimes honestly we end up thinking that we don't have enough agency. Like I know so many design professionals are just sad for not being paid enough or not having enough. Well that's a different argument, because in like a firm or something, when you're a junior designer you don't have much agency, but at the end of the day you're designing, and it's something really powerful. And I mentioned this to Joseph, that design is just a happy thing, and I just wish more people would realize that's a happy thing. If I'm designing a different route during the day to get to work for myself, or like from coming back from work, and it's just it adds something special to my day that I did that differently, or I had this desire and I achieved this goal. Yeah.
What you were saying about power and how designers have power, it's such a good point, and we have to remind ourselves of how much power that we do have and how that can be used for good or for evil. Much like the algorithm on social media, something that was designed to grab and hold our attention for as long as possible, which then leads to the addictive qualities of it. And these are just some things as designers, like that was designed, that algorithm and the way the infinite scrolling, that was all designed. And it was designed to keep us on these apps for longer and longer. And these are things that we really need to remind ourselves of the power and the agency that we do have, and the harm that can come from the things that we create if we're not careful. And it's really important to keep this power structure in mind, because while we're conscious of the design, our consumers and the people that we're interacting with aren't. And to check in on that constantly and remind ourselves looking at the ones we're designing for, keeping them in mind, and just knowing how much the things we create can affect them.
That made me think of one quote, and I think you can probably guess it.
Yeah, Spider-Man. Uncle Ben.
I'm not gonna say because I think we can, right? Okay.
Disney's not gonna sue us. Just say
it. Yeah, that's. I think that's so spot on. Yeah, like what you're saying, like there are goods and bads of what design can do. Yeah, I think that's a very important thing to also highlight.
Can you just say the code again? I think I spoke over you, and it's just important everyone hears it.
Yeah, the code. I mean, if you don't know this, then that's unfortunate. But the quote was, "With great power comes great responsibility," as Uncle Ben once said, and then Spider-Man won't ever let us forget it. But yeah, like I think especially too with not to complain. I think especially with the way that I think AI is developing too, right? It is becoming something that people are very much like conscious of, and some people are excited by it, and some people are very nervous by it. But I do believe like that we do have to have like that human agency within design, right? Because there is ethical things that are attached to design. And I know some people don't like to think about that, but I think the ethics of design is very important. And I was actually talking to a friend of ours last night about that, and she's also applying to grad school, and she was talking about how like torn up she was that the program that she was really excited about did not have an ethical core to it. And I think especially like now for our generation, looking back at all the things that have been done and the effects that they've had, right? For example, if we look at how American cities have developed, and the legacy of things like redlining and Robert Moses with making bridges too low for buses to pass under them, like all those things are design elements that have been so impactful to the trajectory of so many people's lives, and they might never know that, right? And I think as designers, being on the back end of making these built environment decisions, the ethics of that becomes very important. And I kind of do wish in school that we engage with that a little bit more explicitly. I know, like especially in our education, there were some professors that would make that an important thing to mention here and there, but it wasn't ever like a thing in the curriculum to talk about, right? And everybody struggles with that a little bit. We actually also have another friend that recently their firm was going to be designing at Guantanamo Bay, and she was like appalled as to like how nonchalantly the firm was treating it, and just treating it as like it's a job, so we do it. And you can make the argument that someone is going to do it, so why does it matter if it's me? But I think it's as designers we do have to have, and I think that's the burden of our our abilities to enact in such big ways, is we have to ask ourselves those tough questions and make those difficult decisions. And even if someone else is going to do it, it is your own ethical standing and moral code that should be driving your decisions. And then you come back to your life again, right? Like I think design isn't as impersonal as we sometimes like to treat it, and what you do and what you create in the world you should really reflect on. And yeah, I think so. Sarah bringing that up, I think, was very, very astute. And yeah, and I'm hoping that everybody listening can really take that seriously as well.
Yeah, I agree. That's such a beautiful way to say it. It's just as designers, we're just more conscientious of the ways that we design, and that means we have more responsibility, because what we're designing, the other person won't know how we're exactly doing it. And as designers, I also believe it's our responsibility to tell people what we're doing that is important. It's our thoughtfulness as designers really brings value to the table, that we're aware of what we're doing, we know what we're doing, and part of our job is help people grow to understand their ability in those ways as well, like just what we're doing right now. I'm talking in circles, but what I really mean is it's important for us to tell others when they're designing too, that it's a part of their lives as well.
Yeah. And I think sorry, go ahead.
I found it interesting. I was reading Robbie's prompts and questions, like what do designers bring to the table compared with untrained designers or untrained non-designers. And then Joseph mentioning AI, I was like, okay, I think, yeah, it's time that we get compared with AI, not like even untrained um,
Mm-hmm.
people. It's like what exact I feel like this is something that I'm still figuring out, but like what do we bring to the table as a designer if visual is aided in a huge part, will be aided in a huge part by AI, by its collaging power, by its creative power, creation power. I don't say creative. Um, yet, what I think, like Joseph was saying, like maybe a lot of thing we bring is to make decisions, make ethical decisions
Mm-hmm.
based on our understanding of people, the people that we're designing for. Um, like it's all about like because AI, it's still hard to bear that responsibility to say, okay, AI is designing your city.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but adding like I guess a human tone to it as a designer, like say, hey, we did this research, we want to design with you, and we want to talk to you about like this is the design decisions that we're going to move forward with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and what I was gonna say earlier was like kind of a little bit of a mix between what Imang and Robbie was saying. It is important for people to know this, and that's kind of been the whole point of DocuSpace, is not just a space for us as designers to have a space to express ourselves and to share our world with everybody else, but I really, really, really firmly believe that for architecture and the built environment practices to evolve and change, we need to yet again re-invite people into it. And there is a gatedness to it that we kind of like, right? We like we like the a little bit of that exclusivity sometimes, where it's like, oh, I know this, I know that, and I notice these things that nobody else notices, right? But I think that the uses of that aren't really gonna prosper for the future of our field. Right? Like I think, for example, I have a friend who was sharing me this AI tool that's apparently going to help people design their homes for them, right? So they can take this tool and plug in their criterias, and it will spit out like a plan, right? And I tried to like I guess justify my existence to him to be like I'm still necessary because of X, Y, and Z. And he's like, wait, why isn't this a good thing? And I basically like I think one really good example of I think a moment where an architect is very obviously different from what an AI tool can do. Like AI is not like I think it's very smart and very wise that you distinguish between creation and creative, right? It is creating, but it's not being creative because most of what it's doing is based off of previous things, right? It's like a huge data pooling and then kind of like algorithmically like mix and matching to make something, right? So it's not creating new, right? And the question of newness also can be argued forever whether anything new can be done now. But I think what an architect can do is we can do things that aren't so obvious or aren't so I think it comes to linearity, right? Like sometimes people have very preconceived notions of what things have to be. And I think what architects can do a lot is ask, why are we doing that, right? Like the AI is not going to ask, like, why do we think all houses have to be open plan nowadays, right? Like that's not a question that the AI is going to ask. If you said you want open plan, it's going to tell you that, and it's going to give it to you. But I think what architects can do is we can have a dialogue and push back on our clients. I think that's a very, very important thing that we do. Is we understand the gravity of building things, and so we also do advocate often. I think that's what a good architect does, in my opinion, is we do advocate for making decisions that maybe the client, as an untrained person in design, might not realize, right? And I think that's what some of the best architects will always do, is they'll advocate for what they think is better than what the client is wanting. And as of now, I don't think I know of any AI tools that are going to do that. That is going to be like, sorry, I don't think your house should be like this because the solar patterns of your site would not work for this house, right? Or like it's not going to do those things. It's not going to ask those deeper questions. And I think that's what I was trying to tell him, was like an architect can bring more to it than just like making a competent building, right? We also do have this sort of ability to ask questions and to push people.
Yeah, it's like the question of AI. Everything is getting faster. Clients want the fastest solution. And above all, the demand has become instantaneous, where designers allow more of a back and forth conversation. Then from that, you get compromise. You can open your mind to new ideas, and the overall design can get more layered and overall more complex. And this is really what I think is the sweet spot, and where things begin to get interesting. For example, right now, I'm working on a veteran center and reimagining what they have classically been and are looked at in the US, and started to take a deeper look into the needs of that specific community. And I mean, right now you look at them, they're cinder block buildings with one window, some battle machines out front, and that's really it. They're not really serving that fine grain of the community. As for instance, designing for PTSD or someone that has hearing loss, there are very prominent disabilities among the veteran community that they're not responding to. And just looking at how we can incorporate that unique human experience into our designs, where AI would kind of spit out the most convenient thing, maybe the cheapest thing, but you would really lose the attention to detail. And to really generate something that is meaningful, you need that human designer connection. And it can even potentially make something that is healing for the community, and then are able to grow and build a stronger community, get the help necessary, and even grow professionally and personally in these spaces. So with the wave of AI, is definitely an emerging discussion among designers, and really how we use it and how it could be a tool, but not really the beginning and end of what the design process is.
Yeah. I also want to just clarify my position on AI a little bit too. It's like, I'm not necessarily against it. I think it's a powerful tool that will make a lot of the tediousness and labor of architecture better in the future, right? There's a lot of places with really unhealthy work cultures, and I think AI can really become a remedy to that if we can find smart ways of using it. But I think it should be a tool. It shouldn't necessarily be a replacement. And I think that's the direction that I would personally think is beneficial to have it develop in, right? If it's something that the architect can now interface to do the job easier and faster and quicker, if that's still the goal, right? And I think in that sense, you can kind of have the best of both worlds, where you have this really powerful tool that can draw in like a second, if it gets to that point, or it can generate images much faster than us manually rendering, putting people in, doing the lighting, putting the shadow, right? Like, it can really, really cut back on time. And I think some firms are already experimenting with that, but I think as of now, like, in terms of making it a purely generative tool that like will generate designs, it still definitely will need that human fine grain touch to it, right? Like, I think you definitely always need the architect in the room to kind of bring up these things that Sarah has already like explicitly stated about how you're treating with users with PTSD, for example, right? Like, that's a very human thing, and I think the responsibility should fall on designers to have that ability to bring up these questions, and not just like design a space for them and hope that it doesn't create something that will be what's called traumatic for the user.
Agreed. Humans are humans. We have empathy, we have emotions, and a lot of design that we do is in connecting with other people and understanding what they're going through, and that's not something AI can do. So exactly, you're right. It can't replace humans. It just needs to be a tool. And just wrapping up, very nice conversation, you guys. So what we're planning to do at the end of every episode is just asking people, what do you want the audience to take away from it? And that's what we just want to ask you. Like, from this discussion, what do you want others to take away from? And I've mentioned this before during the conversations. I'm just going to start. What I want people to take away from this is just that design is not gated, and that for me personally, and maybe for others too, it can be a really happy thing to do. And I just hope people become more aware of when they're designing in small ways in their life, or when they're being creative in small ways in their life.
Yeah, I guess for me, I want people to walk away from this questioning things more, and investigating, I guess is a better word for it. Really investigate the ways that all the things you interface are designed. And I think the importance of that is to also realize the influence these things have on you. I think, for example, like the history of redlining, like that's something that really should become part of like American core curriculums, like outside of design. I don't think that's just a design topic, right? It has such huge social and political, economic ramifications for a lot of people, and I think that's something that's part of the history of this country. It shouldn't just be like, I learned this in architecture school. Like I think everybody should know that. So I think that's a more extreme version, but I think people hopefully can find resources to open themselves up to questioning things more and not just taking it as is, right? Like kind of what Imang said, like everything, or Imang quoted, what everything is designed. So I think it's in your best interest to learn these things, and like me with my bike, like it will help you in making the most out of your experience, right? Making the most out of how we interface them, and being more conscious of the decisions we're making and how these things that are designed are influencing that.
Oh no.
Oh no.
Oh, we lost her.
We lost a soldier. It's okay. Maybe we can ask her later.
Yeah, Imang
I think I hear a little bit of her beginning word to be positive. I reckon with that. It's mostly like not just designers, but everyone has this power, or the free will to design, and then realizing that you do have agency and say in your everyday life, to take executive decisions about things around life, whether that be what I'm gonna wear today, or what should the school teach, or what should the society know about. Yeah, and then work towards that. Sidetrack will be knowing that for designers, knowing that AI don't have the power that you have. A lot of times.
You can sleep a little safer.
that's a note to myself. So
it's justifying your existence.
Yeah, yes. Justify your existence. That's such a good way to put it.
No, I agree with Joseph specifically when coming in as someone who's not from the States, who's not very aware of the history and the complexity of history over here and all the racial history. I did not know what redlining was till I actually joined. We did the elective together. Do you remember? I'm forgetting the name of the professor, where we looked into Detroit, and that's where I learned what the history was. Of redlining was, and my mind was just blown, and it's just fascinating. It's just actually not fascinating. It's ridiculous to me how they don't teach that. How these very core words that we know and we use in our everyday vocabulary, literally everyday vocabulary, either educational institutions don't teach us about, or like we don't teach ourselves about. And I think, getting into that practice is also something I want the audience to take away from this. And I don't think Sarah's coming back, so we're just gonna, is she?
Yes, she actually just called me.
Oh.
I'm gonna put you on speakerphone, Sarah.
Okay, so my takeaway is that I would love to be optimistic and say that we are all designers and we have agency. And with that, I do lean towards what Joseph was saying about questioning what we consume. Just have the awareness that everything is designed and everything has an intention behind it, either good or it could be something a little more sinister. So be careful and also be empowered to know that we have the capability to design and shape our reality.
Beautiful. Thank you.
That's so beautiful. Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks for being such a trooper. No. She's in Mississippi, by the way, so she's really making it happen.
Oh, we love Sarah. Okay, well, thank you all for tuning in to the second episode of DocuSpace. Please go ahead and also watch the first one. And, again, this is your grandma's living room. Bring a friend next time, like, subscribe, and everything. And, carry your umbrellas outside because it's raining these days. Take care. Bye bye.
Thank you. Later.